President Trump is challenging Congress to replace DACA after he ended the Obama-era program that protected young undocumented immigrants from deportation. The president tweeted last night, Congress now has 6 months to legalize DACA. If they can't, I will revisit this issue. Here's how leaders from both parties reacted to that message earlier.
President Obama was wrong to do it in the first place because he overstepped his constitutional bounds. We, the president and Congress, take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. So President Trump was right in his decision. He made the right call. I'm also encouraged by the fact that he gave us time to work out a consensus, to find a compromise, because these kids don't, for the most part, don't know any other home than the United States. So I think the president was right to give us the time we need to find that compromise. Where does that compromise exist? That's what we're going to spend the next months figuring out, where that compromise is. But I think it's totally reasonable and appropriate that when you take a look at the DACA dilemma, this is a dilemma that in large part stems from the fact that it is a symptom of a larger problem. And the larger problem is that we do not have control of our borders. And so it's only reasonable and fitting that we also address the root cause of the problem, which is borders that are not sufficiently controlled, while we address this very real and very human problem that's right in front of us.
The president's decision to end DACA was heartless and it was brainless. If this order stands, hundreds of thousands of families will be ripped apart. Tens of thousands of American businesses will lose hardworking employees. Congress has an ability and an obligation to act, which is why we today are calling on Speaker Ryan and Leader McConnell to immediately put the DREAM Act on the floor for a vote in the House and Senate. We're ready to pass it. I am confident that if put on the floor, it will garner overwhelming support from both sides of the aisle. But let us say this, and I think I speak for the leader as well. If a clean DREAM Act does not come to the floor in September, we're prepared to attach it to other items this fall until it passes.
Let's bring in Sabrina Siddiqui. She's a CBSN political contributor and a reporter for The Guardian. She joins us now from Washington. So, Sabrina, President Harry Truman had a sort of a sign on his desk that said, "The buck stops here." The president of the United States, Donald Trump, had a book called The Art of the Deal. For a lot of people, the fact that he sent out Jeff Sessions to do this, and then he tweets out basically a bluff saying, "I will revisit this," has a lot of people going, this is the art of passing the buck.
Yes, look, I think it's clear that President Trump did not want to incur the blame, even though this was ultimately his decision to rescind the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, also known as DACA, executive action that was taken by Obama in 2012. Now, you'll recall that Obama took that action only after the DREAM Act failed to pass Congress in 2010, and it looked as though there was going to be no legislative solution in sight. Of course, there are some political calculations. It was an election year, but the fact of the matter is that nearly 800,000 young undocumented immigrants have gotten temporary status through that program, and now they're hanging in the balance, in essence, hoping that Congress acts within the next 6 months. And it's hard to take the president at his word when he says that he might revisit this issue, because at the end of the day, he certainly had conflicting statements about whether or not he ultimately supports the program, and there certainly is not a lot of agreement on how to actually pass a legislative solution on Capitol Hill.
Right. The president was on the campaign trail saying that he would end DACA, but then many times he said how he understands the difficult position some of these children are in. He says he loves the dreamers. And then you've got the question that a lot of people certainly are right to point out, which is, as you just did, that President Obama did do this. He was trying to compel Congress to do something after their inability to get anything done over the course of 15 or even 20 years, but that he may have overstepped his constitutional authority in doing that. And also critics will say that he gave license to other people to say, well, look, if I can somehow get into the United States, then my children and myself will perhaps be protected. What of those criticisms?
Well, there have been conservatives who have sought to tie the crisis of unaccompanied minors in 2014 who were fleeing violence in Central America and entering the U.S. To DACA and the policy as it existed. But the fact of the matter is that none of those unaccompanied minors would have been eligible based on the requirements for DACA as they stood. These are all individuals who had to have been 16 when DACA was announced, and so obviously they wouldn't have applied. And I think that the fact of the matter is that there were certainly court challenges that were levied against the subsequent executive action taken by Obama that was geared toward undocumented parents. But DACA has so far withheld the scrutiny of the courts. I think that at the end of the day, the question really is, what, if anything, will Congress do? Or do they believe that they have some degree of cover now that the president has said, or at least suggested, that he might revisit this issue? Yeah, that tweet, again, it's sort of baffling because it's almost as if any bit of leverage the president of the United States may have had has gone out the window by saying, I'll revisit it. Because if Congress doesn't do anything and the president decides not to do anything, well, that's a draw, and that's sort of an embarrassing defeat for the president of the United States. On the other hand, if he decides to just do it because Congress is unable to get anything done, that could have potential ramifications politically down the line. Or perhaps the Congress will pass something, but it'll be a very sort of more of a liberal bent on DACA than perhaps his base would have wanted to see. And again, it's something that doesn't come out looking good for the president. Yes, the question really is, are they going to pass a standalone DREAM Act-style bill? It doesn't seem likely, given that House Speaker Paul Ryan today was very much echoing the talking points of the White House. Yesterday, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the press secretary, told reporters that the president did not support a standalone fix, that he wants to see broader immigration reform. The trouble is he's only given them 6 months. When you think about the fact that they have to avert a government shutdown by September 30th, raise the debt ceiling by September 29th, pass emergency funding for Hurricane Harvey, reauthorize other critical programs, flood insurance, the FAA, the list goes on, as well as debate tax reform, and then somehow enact protections for dreamers all by March of 2018. That's very unlikely. But also Democrats have said that it would be a non-starter if Republicans tried to tie funding, for example, for the border wall to the status of dreamers. I really do think that you will actually see this be a wedge issue potentially in 2018 with little, if any, action from Congress. And then, of course, begging the question if the president is serious about revisiting the issue in the next, after 6 months have passed. Right. So you think that this could be a rallying cry for some Democrats down the line as we look to the midterm elections? Absolutely. In 2010, when the Senate last was considering the DREAM Act, there were 5 red state Democrats who had opposed it then. Now, not all of them are still in the Senate, but when you revisit those votes and you talk to some of the red state Democrats today who are facing tough re-election battles in 2018, they are signaling that they are near uniform in their support for passing the DREAM Act now as it stands. This issue has evolved a lot over the last few years. There's a lot more sympathy for this particular group of young immigrants. Mind you, they were brought here as children, so this is not really something that is viewed as through any fault of their own. They're contributing economically. They're students. A lot of the big tech companies have come out in support of them and said that they will fight to protect them. So it's not as much of a polarizing issue broadly. Really, it is much more so in when you put the Republican base against most of the Republicans in Congress. I do think it'll be more of an issue for Republicans who don't want to take a politically contentious vote while they're still fending off primary challenges from the right, especially when you look at the way that the right has been emboldened on the issue of immigration with the election of Donald Trump, who ran, of course, a very hardline campaign where he did, as you mentioned earlier, vow to rescind DACA on day one. Yeah, Sabrina, you bring up a really good point, which is in the remarks that Attorney General Jeff Sessions delivered yesterday when he said that the president was rescinding DACA, he made the point to say that dreamers are taking jobs from Americans. Now, you saw Senator Lindsey Graham come out and say that's absolutely wrong. For the most part, these dreamers are contributing members to American society. They pay their taxes, they pay student loans, they fight our nation's wars. And then you heard today Chuck Schumer saying, look, there are some Republicans who will join our side. Senator Jeff Flake and Lisa Murkowski, he named 2 of them. Could we find some level of compromise between Republicans and Democrats as we look ahead? I do think that there are actually a lot of Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill who support the concept, at least, of enacting some sort of protections for dreamers, at least a path to permanent residency. The question again is, how do they do it? I think that people like Lindsey Graham, Jeff Flake, John McCain, those were at least 3 of the 4 Republicans who were part of that so-called Gang of 8 comprehensive immigration reform effort in 2013. They would support the DREAM Act if it came to the floor for a vote. There are a lot of other Republicans who will feel the political pressure because you can imagine what the optics would be to vote against it and suggesting that you would be, in essence, supporting the potential deportation of these kids. At the same time, you did hear Paul Ryan say that this is going to have to be part of broader negotiations over border security, that this conversation really begins with border security. That is the new position of the Republican Party, as stated by its leader, President Trump. And that's what makes it a little bit more difficult to imagine that there will be enough Republicans who would cross over the aisle and support a standalone DREAM Act-style bill. And again, that comes back to this question of, if they can't do it as a standalone fix, how are they going to get some sort of broader immigration reform bill done in the next 6 months alone, when they already have so much more on their plate and were unable to pass immigration reform, just in 2013, the last time they revisited this issue, and it's only become more and more of a polarizing issue with the election of Donald Trump.
Spot on analysis, as always, from Sabrina Siddiqui. Thank you, Sabrina. We appreciate it as always.
Thank you.